Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being here today in the Innisfail Public Library. It's just great facility here in Innisfail that really contributes so much to so many people here in central Alberta and in and around Innisfail. I know my niece and nephew have come here lots and used the facility, so it's just fantastic facility. But there's a very exciting announcement here today, and with that, I'd like to turn things over to Premier Jason Kenney for a very significant announcement for rural internet here in Alberta. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Devin, for welcoming us here to the great riding of Innisfail Sylvan Lake. Thank you, Mayor, for welcoming us as well, Your Worship, and the presidents of RMA and rural municipalities of Alberta and Alberta municipalities. That can be confusing, can't it? Who are also joining us here this morning for a very exciting announcement about the economy, especially in rural Alberta. But before I get to that, I also wanted to speak to another important announcement that we as a government are making today. In Budget 2022, as you know, Alberta has added $600 million to our base healthcare budget to help increase capacity, in part better to prepare us for any future waves or pandemics. And that's on top of $900 million that we added to the baseline healthcare budget in 2021 last year, with a focus on reducing surgical wait times. So together, these investments of $1.5 billion mean that Alberta has record high investment in healthcare, just as we have more doctors and nurses working in our system than ever before. But there's a lot to be done to catch up from the backlogs created by COVID. And one of the key learnings in the COVID era has been that we just did not have enough capacity. In fact, in 2019, Alberta inherited the lowest per capita number of intensive care beds of any Canadian province, even though we have had one of the most expensive systems in Canada, and indeed one of the most expensive publicly administered systems in the world. That's not acceptable. It's just not good enough. And it meant that too often we were running out of space, or at risk of running out of space in our intensive care units at the peak of a couple of COVID waves. And that is why today we are announcing that half of the $600 million additional investment in healthcare this year, that is to say $300 million, will be invested in building critical care capacity by creating at least 50 additional ICU beds in Alberta hospitals. That's 50 permanent, fully staffed intensive care unit beds this year alone, thanks to a $100 million investment in Budget 2022, and that's nearly a 30% increase over current capacity. So this is a key part of our plan to grow healthcare capacity so that we are better protected from events that are outside of our control. And I just once again want to thank all of our wonderful frontline healthcare workers for all that they've done over the past 2 difficult years. As we know, it's not just our healthcare system, but our economy that was hit hard by COVID, by the largest global economic collapse since the Great Depression, and here in Alberta, hit hard by the largest collapse of energy prices ever in history. We saw in the spring of 2020 about a $100 negative turnaround in the price of our key benchmark commodity price for oil. And that meant that 2020 and part of last year, we were going through a deep and challenging recession on top of 5 already difficult years. But here's the great news. Alberta is back in a big way, leading the country in economic growth, recovery, and job creation. Now we need to ensure that all Albertans participate fully in this new era of prosperity. We are seeing it not just in our energy sector, but in every sector of Alberta's economy. We're seeing diversification happen like never before. That was reflected in last Thursday's provincial budget, a plan to move forward, where you see dynamic revenue growth happening, not just in oil and gas royalties, but in every source of revenue, through every industry and sector, and in every part of the province. Now, there is one challenge here, which is that so much of that growth is happening in record investments and job creation in the digital, high-tech, and innovation sector, which really represents so much of the world's future economy, the so-called digital economy, the innovation economy. And we need to ensure that every Albertan, regardless of where they live, has a chance to participate in that future digital economy. It also is about providing better services. Through much of COVID, we've seen what it means in certain rural and remote parts of the province not to have access to adequate high-speed internet. I've heard stories about kids whose parents have brought them to parking lots outside of libraries like this or to Tim Hortons just so they could get access to high-speed internet. We know that rural health care is impaired by not always having access to reliable high-speed internet. We know that rural schools can't deliver the same high-quality programming if they don't have access to that high-speed internet, and many rural businesses are hampered as well. It is critical that we bridge the digital divide, and right now too many Alberta families and households, businesses and public institutions do not have access to adequate high-speed internet. And so that is why, as part of Alberta's recovery plan, we've developed the Rural Broadband Initiative, Alberta's broadband strategy that has been led by Minister Nate Glubish here. And last year, we announced important initial investments. I'm delighted to be here today to announce that as a result of Budget 2022, that Alberta is contributing nearly $400 million through a provincial investment over 4 years in the Alberta broadband strategy that will get us close to 100% high-speed internet broadband coverage for people all across the province, including rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. This is a huge step forward. But it's not just Alberta that's acting. We are pursuing a smart strategy to leverage our investment to get more federal dollars into rural broadband service in Alberta and to attract more private sector investment through the telecommunications companies that are ultimately responsible for delivering these services. Minister Glubish will speak more about the strategy in a moment, but the concept is to try through our federal and private sector partners to drive for upwards of $1 billion in total investment in renewing access to broadband and high-speed internet across the province. We estimate that this could help to grow our economy, these investments, by up to $1.7 billion and up to 5% GDP growth in the ag sector. We believe it can be the result of just having better access to ag tech. I can tell you that in Alberta, TELUS, for example, has made critical investments in turning Alberta into a global center of excellence for digital tech in the applications in the ag industry. We're talking here about 2,000 long-term service industry jobs that will be created, we estimate, in rural communities, and up to 40,000 Albertans without access to a primary health care provider may have improved access to telehealth, and the cost to deliver these services will be reduced, while more than 120,000 students will have improved access to remote education. We estimate that Alberta's broadband strategy will create around 1,500 jobs as the infrastructure is actually being put in place. This is, as I say, the investment started last year, but Minister Glubish has worked closely with the federal government to get, we believe, matching funds for the entire provincial investment. And here's the bottom line. Approximately 490,000 Albertans live in 200,000 households that lack access to adequate high-speed internet. So, and that's about 80% of Indigenous communities. And 67% of rural and remote communities don't have access to reliable high-speed internet. So with these investments, those days will soon be behind us as we move forward in partnership with municipalities, the telecommunications companies, yes, the federal government, to ensure that we achieve our goal of high access to reliable high-speed broadband internet right across the province. And that means connecting rural Albertans to the digital economy. It means better services, and it means a stronger, more resilient, and more diversified economy. So this is a great day for Alberta, and with that, I would like to introduce Minister Glubish.
Well, thank you, Premier, for setting the stage on this historic announcement of a very exciting investment for rural connectivity in Alberta. I just want to say it's so exciting to be here in Innisfail to talk in a little bit more detail about Alberta's broadband strategy and this investment. And I want to thank Mayor Barclay for your hospitality. Thank you to my colleague Emily Dreeshen for arranging for this. And thank you also to Paul McLaughlin from the RMA and Kathy Heron from Alberta Municipalities for making the trip to join us for this exciting announcement about this really exciting investment. So today we're here to talk about Alberta's commitment to ensuring that we eliminate the digital divide and that we ensure that every Albertan and every Alberta business and every Alberta community can have access to reliable, high-speed internet. And the Premier's done a great job of explaining all of the many, many reasons why this is so important. And this is something that I've been working on personally for over 2 years. It's something that is a passion of mine as a former venture capital investor who has had a hand in building technology companies all across this province in my career before becoming an MLA. And I know that technology is powered by connectivity. And so this is so important. And I've heard stories from all across the province, from municipalities, from businesses, from individual Albertans who have told me, Minister Glubish, we need reliable connectivity. Can you help us? And I'm so excited today to be able to say, yes, we can. So today we are releasing, and I'm so excited to release, our comprehensive plan on how we are going to reach universal connectivity. Last year, Alberta's government announced the first stage of this with a $150 million commitment to investing in rural connectivity infrastructure all across this province. And in December of last year, I was even more excited to announce that we had secured a matching investment from the federal government to bring that total up to $300 million. And since then, we have been working very closely with the federal government to review the hundreds and hundreds of applications in front of the Universal Broadband Fund for Alberta-based projects. And I am confident that we are very close to being able to announce the specific projects and the communities that they will touch in the very, very near future. And our goal is to ensure that there will be shovels in the ground this construction season. So stay tuned. But that was, as we always said, just a first step. And as a part of Budget 2022, we announced that we were increasing our funding commitment from $150 million to $390 million over 4 years. This is a significant milestone, a turning point for positive momentum to delivering universal connectivity in Alberta. And this is going to help us to ensure that all across rural, remote, and Indigenous communities, we can achieve the goal of ensuring access to reliable, high-speed internet. And I'm actively working with the federal government now to seek matching funding for the incremental commitment that we have just recently made. And I'm cautiously optimistic we'll have a lot more to say on that in the very near future. We know that solving the connectivity challenges in Alberta is something that requires collaboration between all levels of government, and that is why I've been working so closely with the federal government. It's why I've been working closely with municipalities all across this province, and it is also why I will continue to work with all of the different telcos, telecommunications companies, and internet companies who are working hard to tackle this problem with us. So, Alberta's government refuses to leave rural Alberta behind. It refuses to leave remote communities and Indigenous communities behind, and that is what this broadband strategy is all about, is to close that digital divide and give all Albertans access to reliable high-speed internet. The Premier, as I said, gave some great examples of many of the reasons why this is such an important investment and such an important initiative, so I won't go back into all those same details. But we know that today, 80% of Indigenous communities and 67% of rural communities do not have access to reliable high-speed internet. And our broadband investment and the strategy we are releasing today are going to make a significant impact in addressing that issue. We need a comprehensive plan to get to the result of universal connectivity. And that is why I'm so pleased today to be releasing Alberta's broadband strategy. This is going to power education, it's going to power workplaces, it's going to power communities and individual Alberta households to access the high-speed, reliable internet that they need to participate in a modern economy and to reach their fullest potential. This is about access, as we've talked about. This is about affordability, and it's about reliability. And so the broadband strategy that we are releasing today maps out Alberta's approach to ensuring that every Albertan will be able to access high-speed internet. It maps out our approach to ensuring that that access will be affordable. And in part, that will be dealt with through negotiations with the partners that we work with through our funding arrangements to ensure that if they are getting supports from the Alberta government, that the end result that they deliver will need to be affordable for the communities they're going to serve. And reliability is an enormous priority for this strategy, because at the end of the day, if we put public dollars to support construction of infrastructure, we need to make sure that folks can count on it every single day. So we've talked a little bit about the funding announcement, which is a big part of this, but there are two other parts that are really important to touch on that are in the Alberta broadband strategy. One of them is technology. I've been saying this all along over the last 2.5 years as I've been touring the province to talk about the challenges that we need to overcome for rural connectivity. And what we need to be mindful of is that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. We are going to look for every opportunity to bring fiber where it makes sense. But we also know that there will need to be fixed wireless in other communities that are a little bit more remote. And we also know that in some of the farthest reaches of the province, we will need to be open to using low Earth orbit satellite technology, which has had enormous advances in recent years. And so Alberta's broadband strategy will take a comprehensive approach that is open to all forms of technology where it makes sense so that we can deliver universal connectivity. And then a final piece on the broadband strategy is that there are certain policy areas that are in the jurisdiction of the federal government that could use some common sense updates and reforms to help eliminate unnecessary barriers to private sector investment. And the specific one I'm referring to is on spectrum policy. And I won't get into the tech details of this, but suffice to say that we share the goal with the federal government of reaching universal connectivity. The federal government regulates access to spectrum, which is what the telecommunications companies need in order to develop wireless internet. And we are going to be continuing to advocate to the federal government to ensure that they have a design for rural Canada approach to auctioning off spectrum, to ensure that they have a use it or lose it framework, to ensure that it can't be purchased by a telecommunication company and then sat on for years undeveloped. And finally, to ensure that their policies discourage buying up spectrum solely for the purpose of reselling it. The whole goal needs to be making sure that any spectrum that gets purchased in an auction is immediately used and developed to facilitate investments in rural Canada, and especially for our interests in rural Alberta. So Alberta's government is committed to providing the funding, the advocacy, and the strategic support to deliver universal connectivity in Alberta, and our broadband strategy outlines our plan to get the job done. As more homes and businesses and communities are connected to high-speed internet, our province can expect to see many, many benefits. The Premier talked about telehealth options to reach rural Albertans who do not have access to the health care that they need today. We can make that better for them through better connectivity. Learners of all ages will have access to better online educational resources, including continuing education. And upskilling for professionals will help to ensure that Alberta's workforce has the skills they need to support a modern and digital economy. Businesses will be able to access the global marketplace and reach new customers. The Premier talked about agriculture technology advances that will be enabled by this connectivity, which will be so important for Alberta's economy. This will also foster reconciliation efforts with First Nations across the province by ensuring that Indigenous communities are connected and have access to the services they need and can participate meaningfully in a modern digital economy. And we expect to see an increase, a $1.7 billion increase in Alberta's GDP as a result of achieving universal connectivity. So this is great news for Alberta. I've always said that technology is the future of every industry. But at the root of technology is connectivity. And so to ensure that we can reach the fullest potential of every industry across Alberta, we need universal connectivity. Connectivity connects us, it supports us, it empowers us, and that is why it is so important that our broadband strategy that we've released today and this historic $390 million investment from the provincial government, that is why these are so important to helping Alberta reach its fullest potential. And this will ensure that every Albertan, regardless of where they live, can participate in Alberta's economic recovery. So I look forward to seeing all the ways that our province will grow as broadband projects are implemented and Alberta moves closer to universal connectivity, where every home, business, and community can access high-speed internet. And now I'd like to invite Paul McLaughlin, President of the Rural Municipalities of Alberta, to the podium to say a few words. Thank you.
Every time we talk about broadband, I come smiling. As the president of Rural Municipalities of Alberta, everybody has a view. I represent the municipalities that go from border to border to border, from the north to the south, the good folks in Mackenzie all the way down to 40 Mile. And so you think, my number one issue as a rural municipal leader, as the president of RMA, is agriculture or other pieces. Truth be told, my number one issue is broadband. And the reason why, and I'll use the word enabling, and I must say that both the Premier and Mr. Glubish, you can tell that they did their homework. Every single thing they said was exactly what I'm hearing too, boots on the ground. I'll use the word enabling. This is the perfect investment. This is an investment that actually, again, deals with the digital divide, but this enables. This enables dreams to come true. This enables access that folks in rural Alberta can participate in the economy. This is the field of dreams approach to investment, where if you actually provide the conduit and the connections, this will actually allow us to participate. More importantly than that, though, and what I want to speak to a little bit, is that, again, there's multiple solutions to the same problem. Alberta is full of entrepreneurs, whether it's agricultural entrepreneurs or it's folks that are actually tied in the IT sector. And the small mom and pops have been solving this problem at the local level. A father and son have actually been connecting people all throughout rural Alberta and actually providing the service that they deserve. I think the message is that first you got to define a problem. And what's been identified by both the Premier as well as the Minister is that really there is a digital divide. The data that we have is only 10% of the good folks that I represent actually have access to the 5010, have access to actually what could be called good quality broadband. This will enable those folks to start to actually bridge that gap. In the north, they have 4 megabytes down. Just imagine that. You can barely watch. If you ever watch a Netflix movie, watching the spinning wheel and buffering is the most annoying thing on the planet. But it goes beyond that. It actually goes exactly reconciliation, conversations around access. And I don't want to get too melodramatic, but we should talk about democracy. The fact is that this democratizes the access to information. We need to have information. We need to talk. We need to share. We need to have ideas. In order to have innovation, we need to all of us to have access to the same information. Again, I'll go back to enabling. This enables rural Albertans to actually move forward and to participate in the economy. Smart ag, everything that we do right now, the Internet of Things, the ability to actually know when your oil change on your car is, would be pretty upsetting if your oil change was buffering or your vehicle was buffering. That's the stark reality we're dealing with. I think we can go beyond the conversations now and quit talking about parking lot school, parking lot education, trying to actually have a meeting, a Zoom meeting at the Tim Hortons parking lot or at the library parking lot. Going beyond that and actually providing opportunities for folks to access this and, again, create ideas. The one thing I've seen, too, through COVID is the access to data is the number one question as Riva Ponoka County people ask, what's going on in my county, in Ponoka County, is how's the broadband speed? Not how low the taxes are or how amazing the REIV is. It's actually access to broadband is the number one question we have, and it's a real question. Because the fact is that we're actually seeing young professionals, folks with ideas and innovation coming to rural Alberta. And more important to that, talking about newcomers, folks coming from other countries, they require this broadband access in order for them to be successful. For them to bring what they're going to bring to us is energy, innovation, and ideas. So I will thank the Premier. I will be smiling. I'm very excited. We are 3/4 of a way there to a $1.2 billion problem. They've answered what we've heard, is we want to have reliable internet, we want to have access for everyone, and at the same time we want to ensure that it's not just one solution, but deals with the multiple solutions that are out there. So thank you, Minister. Thank you, Premier. On behalf of rural Alberta, we're getting there. Thank you for enabling it, and this is the field of dreams. If you build it, we will definitely come. Thank you. Kathy Herron's next, please. Forgot I had a job. It was inspirational.
Yes, thank you, Paul. My name is Kathy Herron. I'm the Mayor of St. Albert, but I'm also the President of the Alberta Municipalities. And as I stand here today, so excited. This represents years and years of advocacy, and if anything, it demonstrates what the partnership between municipalities and the provincial government can achieve. When you have united voices calling for improvements, this is the result, and today is a great day. So Alberta Municipalities represents 275 communities, and everybody quite often thinks of Edmonton and Calgary, but we also represent 1 million people living in mid-sized cities and 4 corners of the province and towns and villages and summer villages. And although Edmonton, Calgary, and my hometown, St. Albert, might have great internet and reliable for years, it is those more remote communities that are very often considered substandard internet. In 2001, the government of Alberta had SuperNet initiative, and it helped improve internet services throughout the province. Innisfil where we are here today, is one of those member communities that was a benefit of this initiative. And honestly, it allows me to be here today. I have a meeting in the other side of the country that I will jump onto through internet right after this. That is the glory of good internet, and this wonderful building is a great place to host this today. So it's a grand vision, honestly, and hearing Minister Glubish talk about the range of technology is so good to hear, because one size does not fit all, and so having the investment along with the strategy is really what we have been asking for. There's a community just south of us, Nanton, who needed to build a new water treatment plant. But they had to invest an enormous amount of money just to get fiber to that plant, because the technology required in today's wastewater treatment required that internet service. So it is quickly becoming not just a privilege, but actually a basic human right to have access to the internet. And it goes for technology for our basic services. It goes definitely for education and for healthcare. And coming out of a pandemic where we all quickly adapted to the living online, those communities that didn't have that were highlighted and left out, and this announcement today is what brings this all wraps around and wraps up the pandemic in a good way. So I'll leave it at that. I'm going to give it back to the Premier for questions. I just wanted to be part of this because it does represent a true win for everybody in Alberta. Thank you.
Thanks for making the effort to come all the way down. Appreciate that. Snowy roads.
All right, we're going to move on to the media Q&A. We have one question on the floor, and then we'll move to the phones. Go ahead, please identify your outlet and who you'd like to ask your question to.
Yeah, Jordan Canigan with CTV Calgary. I have a couple of questions for the Premier, if I may. Premier, most of your announcements post-budget have been in these smaller rural communities. What is the meaning behind where you are making these announcements, where you are announcing the funding, and what have you heard about the level of support for you and your government in some of these smaller and rural communities?
Well, I'm not sure that is accurate. In fact, we made a major announcement about the expansion of the hospital, Lockheed Hospital Foothills Hospital, in Calgary last week. We announced the expansion of the Red Deer Hospital in the third largest city of the province. Budget 2022 and the Alberta Recovery Plan are about every part of the province. But let's face it, on announcements like today, rural Albertans don't have access to the same level of services. And so it's important that we change that. This is not something that we just developed in the last couple of weeks or in the back of a napkin. The Alberta broadband strategy has been under development really since the summer of 2020 as part of the Alberta Recovery Plan. So these are investments that will help all Albertans. You know, I would say to folks who live in the big cities that we need to understand that the majority of Alberta's wealth actually comes from rural Alberta. The fact that we're able to balance the budget this year is in large part because of increased energy wealth that is developed by rural Albertans. So we need to be there to ensure that the services are there for rural Alberta communities. But no, as I say, we've been making major announcements in the cities the other day. I think it's a $50 million investment in the Edmonton University of Alberta Neuroscience and Brain Institute, the expansion of surgical facility at the Foothills Hospital. I'm making another major announcement tomorrow about expansion of continuing care in Calgary. And so this is a whole of Alberta approach.
You have a follow-up, Jordan?
I do, yeah. Thank you, Premier. I wanted to ask you about the leadership review. It's just over a month away. What is the vote percentage or the threshold of support that you are aiming for and would need to be able to confidently continue to be the leader of the UCP? Is it a simple majority vote? Is it 70, 75%?
Well, in a democracy, majority is 50% plus one.
Thank you, Premier. We'll move to the phones now. Operator, can you please put through our first caller?
Lisa Johnson, Edmonton Journal. Hi, thanks for taking my question. This is for the Premier. I'm wondering, Premier, a group of law professors have written publicly that Tyler Shandro should have not accepted the role of Justice Minister while the Law Society looks into 3 complaints that he broke the Code of Conduct. I'm curious to know if you considered the possibility that this puts the Law Society in a difficult position, and what was your decision-making behind this?
No, I think that's completely untrue. The Law Society is an independent, self-governing regulatory body. It is not doesn't follow the direction of the Minister of Justice. These are complaints that have been made by the same people that have filed a complaint against Dr. Hinshaw at the Alberta College of Physicians, who have a hyper-politicized agenda trying to discredit our Chief Medical Officer of Health because they disagree with, I guess, statements that she has made. These regulatory bodies are independent, they are self-governing, and it's certainly not the first time we've seen politicized complaints being filed at regulatory bodies for ministers of the Crown. In fact, under the NDP, Kathleen Ganley, Minister of Justice at the time, faced a similar complaint at the Law Society for what appeared to be motivated by political reasons. So she didn't step aside. She was right to continue to serve in her position. Despite that, the independent complaints process will happen in a unencumbered by any direction from government, and that's as it should be.
You have a follow-up, Lisa?
Thank you. Yes, so I'm wondering, is nevertheless the perception of the public on the integrity of the Law Society could be affected by how they make a decision in Shandro's hearing. So I'm curious why you didn't appoint an interim minister while the Society conducts the investigation.
I don't think the integrity of the Law Society was put in doubt by a politicized complaint filed at the Law Society against then NDP Justice Minister Kathleen Ganley. I don't think the independence of the College of Physicians and Surgeons has been put in doubt by the politicized complaint filed against the Chief Medical Officer of Health. These are independent regulatory bodies. They will address complaints, whether they are real or frivolous. They have to receive complaints. They have a process. I have every confidence in Minister Chandra, who I think objectively is one of the best qualified ministers of justice in Alberta history. He is a former member of the National Parole Board, a former member of the Calgary Police Commission, and has served his community and our legal system in many distinguished respects.
Thank you. Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Rick Bell, Calgary Sun.
Good morning, Premier, and the other people at the announcement. Just following up on the first question, but in a little bit different tack. As stories now start coming out, as predictably they would, about people organizing in a concerted way against you ahead of the leadership vote, in terms of PACs coming out and organizing, people offered incentives to go to Red Deer, people meeting in small and not so small groups throughout the province. When you hear that that's happening, what is your reaction to that, and what are you doing on your end to garner support for yourself at the leadership vote?
What I'm doing on my end, Rick, is working with our great team to build Alberta, a strong economy and a strong province. That's what today's announcement is about, a historic announcement to allow rural Albertans and Indigenous communities to participate fully in this new era of prosperity. What I and our government is doing is balancing the provincial budget and implementing policies that have led Alberta to lead the country in economic growth last year and this year. What we're doing is cutting red tape and cutting taxes and aggressively attracting investment that has led to record diversification in Alberta's economy. What we're doing is keeping our word, doing what we said we would do, implementing already over 86% of the promises that we made in the last election. What we as a government have been doing is implementing, I think, virtually everything that Conservatives have fought for years in this province. First of all, having created a united party that could defeat the NDP, and then fighting Justin Trudeau's overreach, his carbon tax and anti-Alberta energy policies, bringing in direct democracy through recall and initiative, creating an Alberta Chief Firearms Officer, creating an Alberta Parole Board, successfully fighting Ottawa to get control over major parts of our economy, methane regulations, carbon emission regulations, habitat regulation. What we're doing is keeping our words, doing what we said we would do, expanding the economy, creating jobs, and getting pipelines built.
Rick, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you. So when you see all of this stuff happening, Premier, like I say, third-party groups organizing, having meetings, saying that they're getting a lot of momentum and a lot of people out to these things. Do you see this as significant? Do you see this as something that is worrying to you, or not? I mean, how significant are these stories or these, that are out there? Because I do recall you having a press conference after the UCP convention late last year, where there were stories in advance of the convention that said something really, really significant would happen, and of course it didn't. But I'm thinking now, is this a real significant story? Is this something that you have to really put on your armor and battle? Or is this just a lot of noise full of sound and fury signifying not so much?
Well,
I
Rick,
just want to get a sense of where you feel things are at.
Rick, you're the Rick.
As far as leadership race goes.
So you're the pundit. That's your job. I'm the premier. My job is building the province, standing up for a strong economy and a strong province against Justin Trudeau's an attack on our province, against our energy industry, balancing the budget, expanding healthcare capacity, expanding access to internet across the province, bringing record investment to our province. That's my job. You can continue to spill barrels of ink on that kind of internal party speculation. That's your job. You're right that barrels of ink were spilled about this supposed fight that was going to break out on the floor of the Conservative annual general meeting in November in Calgary, and instead what we saw was an incredibly positive spirit and a united party. Obviously, it's no secret that a lot of Albertans and a lot of Alberta Conservatives were frustrated with COVID measures that were necessary to prevent a catastrophe in our hospitals. And some people are very angry about a government that has promoted safe and effective vaccines. They have every right to express that anger in a democracy. But I think the broad mainstream of Alberta Conservatives want us to continue to getting the job done, keeping our commitments, building a strong province, and being focused on a strong Alberta economy.
Thank you, Premier. Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Shailene Skulski, CTV.
Hello, thank you for taking my question. My question is for the Premier. Premier, in July, you said you respected the decision of municipalities when it comes to the mask mandate, and one-size-fits-all approach doesn't make sense for our vast and diverse province. Why have you taken the opposite approach now with the City of Edmonton?
Well, again, we have demonstrated great flexibility throughout the pandemic, but with respect to municipalities. But as we now leave broad-based COVID restrictions behind and move, I believe, to an endemic phase of COVID-19, it's important that we do so with unity and clarity as opposed to division and confusion. There is no longer a compelling public health rationale to maintain those policies. And so what I think we now see is an effort by a very small number of people to politicize this. We should not allow politicians at any level to use COVID policy as a political tool to make political points. These are public health issues that have to be addressed through a public health lens, and the province is primarily responsible for public health. So I think as we move forward, we need to move forward together, united, not with endless political bickering over restrictions that will only cause greater confusion. At this point, meaning that, even Edmonton itself has admitted that they would not enforce the bylaw, so what is the point of it? We want to create just very simple parameters as we move forward, that there will be one Alberta approach. We will happily listen to municipalities if they have input with respect to public health issues. We're always open to that dialogue. But we don't want to create confusion for Albertans who don't know, when they cross a city boundary, whether they have to change their behavior. And at this point, enough already. These kinds of bylaws have to effectively be enforced by often very young staff in retail and service businesses. They have borne the brunt of that enforcement challenge for too long. It's time to get our lives back to normal. That's what Alberta has decided to do, and I look forward to being able to do that with a sense of unity and clarity rather than division and confusion.
You have a follow-up, Chelan?
I do. When you talk about these decisions being made by the province, you say it's because you are experts on health. They need to be based on public health science. However, when asked by reporters, the Chief Medical Officer of Health would not reveal what advice she had provided to the COVID committee, meaning the decisions were made based on a political basis, not based solely on the advice of health experts. So would you consider then allowing Dr. Hinshaw's advice to be shared with the public?
Again, what I've said is that the province is primarily responsible for public health. That's very clear in the Public Health Act. It is not the case in the Municipal Government Act. We respect the very important role that municipalities play in our society in providing key services to their communities, but this is properly a legal responsibility of the province. We've shown a great deal of flexibility, but as we leave hopefully the pandemic state of COVID behind us, I think it's critically important that we provide clarity and simplicity for Albertans and that we move forward together, not with this being used as an endless political football.
Thank you, Premier. Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Dave Kaiser, City News.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for taking my question. To follow up on a couple questions ago there, Premier, several MLAs and former Wild Rose members are holding town halls where they're questioning your abilities as leader, and one with Dave Hansen and Vitor Marciano. You were compared to Joseph Stalin and accused of stacking the deck of being a cheater and a bully. So what do you say to that and those who are criticizing and organizing against you?
Well, look, I'm happy to be held accountable as a leader, and people are free to come out and vote according to their judgment at our leadership review. But comparing me to a genocidal dictator, I think demonstrates the nature of some of that opposition. You know, I understand that there's a fellow, for example, Todd Beasley, who was excluded as a candidate by our party in the last election cycle, who, why? Because he had said on Facebook that, and I paraphrase here, Muslims are Satan worshippers, and called for them to be killed. There are people with extreme views who we screened out as candidates in the last election who are angry about that. And but I believe that in part because of some of that extreme sentiment and that extreme, those un-Albertan views, that mainstream Alberta Conservatives believe we need strong leadership, continuity in a government that's focused on doing the people's business, not on endless internal divisions and debates. And our focus as a government is getting the job done, which is why we brought in the first balanced budget in Alberta since 2014 last week, the second since 2008. It's why we've been so focused on the recovery plan and our pro-growth policies that have Alberta leading the country in economic growth, job creation, and recovery. It's why we're making critical investments like the ones here today. So, you know, in politics, you're always going to have a small number of people who make extreme statements like that. But thankfully, I don't think views like that reflect the views of the vast majority of Albertans, or for that matter, the vast majority of Alberta Conservatives.
Safety, have a follow-up?
I do. So do you feel like maybe those views you're describing as extreme, you know, people who are comparing you to Stalin, criticizing you, that sort of thing, do you believe that those voices could prevail here, and are they starting to drown out the more reasonable conservative voices in the province, and how do you stop that?
Well, my focus and the focus of our government is on building a strong Alberta, particularly a strong Alberta economy. And the proof is now clear that we are succeeding in achieving that vision. We were elected on a mandate to create economic growth, job creation, getting pipelines built, building a stronger Alberta, and that's exactly what we're delivering on. That's so clear right now. We have now, look, a lot of the anger was fueled by COVID measures that were absolutely necessary to prevent a catastrophe in our hospitals. But thankfully, that's behind us now because Albertans rose to the challenge. And now we get to move on and focus on those things that unite us, our economic agenda, fighting for a strong Alberta, keeping our commitments to Albertans from the last election. So there will always be some people who are in a kind of permanent opposition mindset, and there will always be, unfortunately, a small number of people with truly extreme views. I believe that the vast majority of Alberta Conservatives want a common sense, mainstream, free enterprise government and leadership, and so that's why I'm confident about receiving an endorsement from the majority of mainstream Conservative members on April the 9th.
All right, we have time for one more. Operator, can you please put through our last caller?
Brittany Gervais, Calgary Herald.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. This is for the Premier and the Minister. So I haven't seen the strategy yet, but through this plan, I'm wondering when does the province expect to have all Albertans connected to high-speed internet, and will the province establish an advisory group to do this?
Well, first of all, thank you for actually asking an on-topic question. What a refresher. You know, this is no big deal. This is just like $1 billion of investment in ensuring that Albertans can plug into the future economy. So thank you for actually caring about issues that matter to real people. The answer is, Nate will give you the precise statistics, but in terms of an advisory committee, we have had endless and deep consultations led by Minister Glubish with the internet service providers, the telecommunications companies, the Federal Department of Industry, and Alberta municipalities, as well as other stakeholders. And that is what led to the Alberta Broadband Strategy, which was developed and published in 2020, began with our initial provincial investment of $100 million last year, now expanding to $390 million. But my understanding is within 4 years, when fully complete, we will be very close. We'll be over 99% of households and communities at having achieved the federal CRTC definition of what constitutes acceptable and reliable high-speed internet service standards. This is a very big province, so I doubt we'll ever fully reach 100%. There's always going to be some extremely remote, trappers' cabins and some very remote Indigenous communities that are very hard to get to in service. But I think we can get well over 99%, and with that I'll invite Minister Glubish to say more.
Well, thank you, Premier, and thank you for the question. And yes, so our announcement today outlines our strategy over a 4-year period to put $390 million to work from the Government of Alberta, and of course our efforts to seek full matching from the federal government on that. And again, I'm excited that we'll, cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to have an exciting announcement on that very soon. And then of course to leverage that to unlock hundreds of millions of dollars more from the telecommunications companies and the internet companies that are working to build this infrastructure. And that's where the $1 billion number the Premier mentioned comes from. So this is a 4-year plan to roll out that funding. Now construction of course still takes some time, so I believe that the construction will be complete from these initiatives by the end of fiscal 2026-2027. And while the Premier is correct that there are some extremely remote cases that will be the most difficult to reach, I'm still very optimistic that some of the recent advances in low Earth orbit satellite technology will help us to reach even some of those most remote places. Those will likely be among the areas that will be tackled in the back end of this initiative. Will be focused in the first couple of years on the most obvious low-hanging fruit, while also balancing aspects of regional fairness, because we do need to make sure that every corner of the province is going to see benefits and results from this initial investment. And certainly, just in case this is on anyone's mind watching today, let me be perfectly clear that the early stages of these investments will have Indigenous communities as a part of the rollout, and stay tuned for more on that very soon.
Brittany, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. Thank you. So wondering, I know that finalizing a broadband strategy was listed as a goal for Service Alberta, I think since 2019. So wondering why it has taken until now for the province to finalize and release this plan.
Yeah, thank you. So look, this is an enormously complex challenge There are hundreds and hundreds of communities, hundreds of thousands of households, tens of thousands of businesses that are underserved or not served at all today. And as the Premier said, we can't just come up with something on the back of a napkin overnight to solve this problem. The good news is that hard work that we've put in over the last 2 years is paying off today in a big way. And that has culminated in a historic financial commitment of $390 million from the province over the next 4 years. It has resulted in, so far, $150 million of matching funding that we negotiated with the federal government to bring those tax dollars back to Alberta, to put to work for a top priority for Alberta communities and Alberta families. And we will continue to work tirelessly to make sure that we can secure even more matching funding from the federal government to recognize the increased commitment that we announced last week as a part of Budget 2022. And we will continue to work on the enormously complex policy advocacy work, building a coalition of like-minded provinces across this country to encourage the federal government to make common sense amendments to their spectrum policies so that we can ensure that the spectrum that does get auctioned off does not sit idle for rural Alberta and rural communities all across Canada. I'm confident we can make some significant progress in that regard, but it's not going to happen overnight, and I don't think Albertans expected any of this to happen overnight. But the good news is today represents a huge step forward and will, I believe, demonstrate to all Albertans that there's some significant momentum here, and we have a credible, comprehensive, funded plan to get the job done.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes our press conference.
Thanks, everyone.